Dear reader, since the thesis that I am now unfolding in front of you are utterly new, I do not think it worth it to entrust them to many of my friends and colleagues, professors of universities, Italians or foreigners, the duty for the preparation of the preface for this book, because many of them, even though they are learned and very capable in their own disciplines, they do not know the language of Illyrians, the Albanian, or Arbanis. And those who have knowledge of this language mostly do not know the science and mysteries of the hieroglyphs, the creator of whom is Thoth Hermes. For this reason, I have taken upon myself the responsibility to write this book as concisely as possible. Let us begin from the title of the work, Thoth Spoke Albanian. What is the meaning of this very dangerous and bold statement? Let me try to explain as quickly as possible. The scrupulous research that I have done with the help of the critical system of comparison of the many roots of ancient languages, like the Basque esquera, which means in Albanian the language of the past, Albanian, the language of the Hittites, the Hebrew language, Arab and Aramaic, and others, especially the language of the Coptic, the liturgical language of the Christians of Egypt, as well as the studies of many years of the philosophical order, theophysical, historic, archaeologic, ethnographic, mythologic, mathematic, chemic, physical, and naturalist. They have taken me to the conclusion that we must overturn the tradition of thinking of the Neolithic civilization as a crossbreeding between the red and the black race, or between the white and the yellow race. After I long stood upon the great and magnificent and sacred Thebe, Thena, the ark with 1,000 gates, as is described by the wonderful Homer, Iliad, verses 381 to 383, before Pan Amen, the seat of the god Ammon, a name that is made up of the Albanian words at, meaning father, m, which means mother, on, which means ours. Do not forget that God is a male and a female at the same time. As I stood for a long time in front of that mystical fatherland of the most ancient faith, after my difficult initiation of mind and will, I achieved the understanding of the rays of the most clear philosophy, first salvation of the world, the clearness of which showed me in a way that is unchangeable and unopposable, the descendants of the nature of the fountain of the light, the God and his thought, revealed within the relativity of its time and space, a light of pure whiteness. Therefore, I think that the science of esoteric ancientness, unchangeable because it is true, taught upon the ancient temples of Egypt, and rayed down upon all directions, is of boreal origin, exactly how it is described by the last name of that very ancient and survived first mother tongue. In truth, the etymology of the word borea comes from snow, a word coming from Illyrian and Albanian, which always has had the meaning snow, and at the same time is identified with whiteness, with light, with clearness, and esoterically with the clearness of the heart. Therefore, the identifying of our race is not referred to the color of our skin, which is not exactly white, but it comes in a color of a pale rose, sometimes to the dark side, but to the whiteness of the untamed snow, the eternal snow that covers our mountains, from which, in times of ancientness, like a wave, descended our ancestors, taking over slowly the entire continent of Europe and many parts of Asia. So even the Aryans belong to this ancient group, the name of which has an etymology that is clearly understood in the Illyrian Albanian language: Ari, gold; Ara, which means field of grain, which identifies with two things: the color of the hair, which is yellow and golden, of the skin, the yellowness of the time of the harvest, the grain from which was coming the daily bread, virgin and natural, so vital for the life as the light of the sun. These colors, an expression of the different levels of the vibration of the waves of light, symbolize the conditions of the goal of the nature of humans, which is one for all, but it is easier for the few and difficult for the many. This means, as is taught to us by Thoth, that life is a law of sacrifices, that to be part in this main composition of harmony of the universe must first learn how to control force over yourself, how to use well the counterpoint of the divinity, the unmistakable law of esoteric mathematics, which were first taught by Thoth in the ancient temples and altars of Egypt, and later from his disciples, Horasivi, Moses of the Hebrews, Pythagoras of the Calabro-Lucano-Poliesis, Plato of the Greeks. This discipline required a long period of study, exercises, extremely difficult trials and contemplations, 22 years, after which the follower was able to get up from earth into the stars, hence the proverb per aspera ad astra. In this doctrine flutters the concept of finality, emanating with wonderful visibility in the harmony of the spheres, in all the manifestations of the universe, from the most immeasurable celestial bodies distant to electrons and protons and small particles, small flesh, atomic constituents, smallest materials interfering while preserving the chemical properties of the special element. The harmony of the spheres, the overly perceived sensory theory from Pythagoras, scientific proof of which cost Kepler his life, has fascinated for 2,000 years the thought and the greatest scholars of mankind. This musical theory of the Thoth doctrine is filled with spirit, judgment and thought, with drawings and details, and full of teleology. Modern scientists who have achieved the goals of unimaginable knowledge have been found, perhaps against their desire, at the limits of metaphysics, in the face of this reality of superior existence, an experience of sensational wandering, which would be better called enchantment, but only arrogance prevents them to display it and not join in it, as it would be with their place, with the unbroken chorus of endless struggles, and yet harmoniously connected, repeating tirelessly, Gloria tibi, Domine, since times long forgotten. Exactly for such cases, André Lof Jacques Mondevung seemingly shrewdly observed, these scientists deal with the formality of teleology, which testifies to transcendence, how they would deal with a woman, without which they cannot do, but with which they do not want to be shown in public. And I, despite stemming from the belief of the Roman Catholic Church, as I delved into the study of organic chemistry and biology, I personally discovered that in the living cell, the beginning of every being is necessarily of transcendental origin and nature. And although some seemingly unpleasant, seemingly unpredictable and generally regarded as coincidence or bad luck was inevitable, To me it seemed that they would crush and annihilate my energies, my physical and spiritual body, my ideals and hope and plans for the future. So I relied on the divine transcendence found within us, and thanks to the intellectual initiation I had received in my youth and that had continued throughout my whole life, thanks above all to my concentration and the highest degree of will, I managed to give solutions through the esoteric decomposition of the famous Pythagoras theorem, which we had learned at the school of Thoth in the temples of Thebes and Memphis. And that's how I was able to transform defeat into victory, or in other cases, I managed to repel death itself, from which proceeded mercilessly towards me, not always under the guise of wild arrogance, as generally thought, but also under the appearance of a beautiful woman, wrapped in translucent silk, which outlined it perfectly sliding shapes, turning them into light and shadow, fascinating, which cannot go unnoticed by anyone possessed of fullness of their senses. Therefore I denied it, whether because I know the issue, but also from personal experience, the unpredictability and inevitability of events, concepts that testify only to mental laziness and lack of willpower, because videnti et volenti nihil impossibile est. Man, created in the image of gods, possesses an immeasurable reflective creative power, capable of accomplishing amazing and extraordinary things that have within them the miraculous. He has deep roots and the power to turn all evil into good, from him turning any unpleasant event into a glorious event, to detach from the ground and fly higher and higher with the forces of a sail towards the pure illumination of higher cycles. The Pythagorean theorem, according to the esoteric decomposition. From the study of geometry, we have learned that AB is called the hypotenuse, and BC and AC are the two catheters. The triangle is a rectangle, and the sum of the squares built on the floors is equal to the square built on the hypotenuse. So AB2 equals BC2 plus AC2, and the square root of BC2 plus AC2 equals AB. Esoterically, the same theorem belongs to the so-called fate, which is defeated or taken out of the game by focusing on the highest degree of will until you make it coincide with the desire of providence. The arrow S is in the direction of the hypotenuse, means that the human will moves towards the divine goal, which then is fulfilled and equips man with the means of victory and gives him the key to transformation. This occurs when the square built on AD, or the new power gained by man by concentrating to the highest degree of will, manages to defeat or annihilate completely the force of fate.